Hello and welcome to the third video for 3D Studio Max. This video is going to focus on uh, advanced modeling techniques that we're going to create. Like maybe I think we're going to create a chair first, then maybe an electronic device, and if we have time, I'd like to do a third. But I don't really want to go over an hour and 45 minutes or 2 hours. So let's I guess play it by ear and see how much time we have. But I definitely want to start off with a chair. So we're going to get into some edit poly and stuff like that on this video. So this, again, like I said, a little more advanced, so it's a little more focused. The first object that I've chosen to do here is a Mies chair, the BRNO chair, and I went and found my reference images. It's good whenever you're going to model something to have plenty of images. I just have two in this one, and then I also have some of my own pictures here that I've found, different angles. As we go along here, I just really like that picture. I actually made that my background. So as we go along in future videos, you'll see that we can actually bring these images in. But since we haven't learned how to create materials yet, we're not really going to focus on actually creating images inside of Max. So we're just going to jump back and forth a lot to this video. And once we learn how to create textures, we'll see how we can apply these images to planes and do all kinds of fascinating things. Not to mention, whenever you get a flash object like this, you can't actually save these images, so I'm just going to have to leave this open. But it's a nice front view, and we can use this. So, and that's a nice side view there. So this is the chair that we're going to create now. And you'll notice a couple of things just thinking of how we're actually going to do this. If we look at this view here, we can see that we can pretty much extrude this chair using the shape of the side here and adding an extrude modifier. The tricky part for this one is actually going to be creating the handrails for this. And we're going to see that we're going to actually have to draw on 3 different planes at the same time to do this. So I thought it would be good to introduce this. We can pull off a sweep after we get our path, but we need to create our path on 3 different planes in order for this to work. So that's going to be the highlight of the first one. So let's go ahead and get started here. Okay, so I know from the left profile that I can, like I said, extrude the seat. So I'll go ahead and create the seat first. So I'll make my left view large here. And I want to check my grid spacing. It's at 10 inches right now. And since that chair is roughly 21 inches by 21 inches, and I mean the seat of that chair is roughly 21 by 21, I want to actually make the squares here smaller. So to do that, I go for tools and grids and snaps, grid snap settings, home grid, and I'm going to change this to, let's see, 2 inches. So now each one of those squares will get smaller there. Now you see this squares got smaller, so now I'm working with 2-inch squares. So I can close that now. You'll see it updates the 2 inches here. And you'll also see when I move my mouse, and I know it's going to be hard, it's hard for me to see on this laptop screen, especially on your screen, I imagine it's really hard to see my grid lines, but right about here is 2 inches, and you can confirm that with your coordinates down here. So right about there is should be 2 and 2, and I'm pretty close to that. So my grid is to the right size now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually create the shape with lines and then extrude it. So I'm going to select my line tool, and just so I have some sort of reference as to where this is all happening, I'm going to start my first line at the origin here, 0, 0. So to do that, I actually need to come up here and turn on the 2 snap, and I need to make sure grid points is on. Okay, now you'll notice I'm snapping those grid point intersections. So now I can snap to 0, 0, 0. Okay, so now that I've snapped there, I click and I've created this line. It's important to remember that this isn't AutoCAD, so you cannot come up here and select this again if you're in a command. Okay, if you're in a command, you actually use the keyboard shortcut keys. And the keyboard shortcut key for snap is the letter S on your keyboard. So you'll notice if I hit S, it turns snap off. If I hit S again, it turns it back on. So when you're in a command, you actually have to use the keyboard shortcuts to do that kind of stuff. Alright, so I'm just going to come out here roughly to where down here where this says distance to where it roughly says 21 inches. And I'm not going to get it perfect because we're going to do some modification here. So I'm just going to rough this in here. And once I get my first line, I can pretty much sketch the rest of it of how I think it should be. Now, I'm not really worried about sizes right now. That is the least of my worries. Okay, so now that I'm here, I need to get as close to this first as possible and click, and you'll see it gives me this box. Do I want to close it? And since we're going to extrude this, we want this to be closed, because anytime that we want to have a solid object, our path needs to be closed. So I hit yes. Okay, so that closes that for me. So now that this is complete here, I can select modify, and now I can modify the sub-objects of this line that we've created. And I want to actually focus on the vertices now, so I'll select vertex. So if I select a vertex now, you'll notice with my move, I need to make sure my move tool is selected here. But now I can modify this any way that I want to. And looking at my y coordinates here, I can get an idea, or I'm sorry, my z coordinate, I can get an idea of how high I need to go. And just base things basically off of where I'm at on here. I know roughly that, the thickness of this, just based off of the images alone, I'm not really concerned about size. It's not like I'm actually going to build this chair. We just need to make this chair look right for a rendering, so don't waste your time trying to make it perfect. For all of you people out there that are perfectionists, believe me, I'm right there with you, but when you don't need it to be perfect, don't make it perfect, because Max isn't built to be perfect 100% of the time. So you have the tools to do it, it's just not as evolved as it needs to be. It's not SolidWorks or anything like that, where you're going to have constrained dimensions. It's for, freely creating this stuff to look right. So just by basing off that this is 21 inches wide by 21 here, I'm going to guess that this might be 3 or 4 inches here. And I know that my grid blocks are 2 inches because I created them to be 2 inches. So that would mean that that would be 2. So about there would be 3. So I'm pretty safe with that being like right there. So I can judge everything off of that. Again, just make it look right. Okay, so this comes over 21 inches. That means that this needs to come way up. So instead of selecting, since I've got these where I want them, I'm going to hit the number 2 on my keyboard, and that's going to select segment. Okay, so that's the same as me coming over here and clicking segment. So I've hit 2, now segment selected. So now instead of selecting vertices, I can select segments. And I'll make my back of my chair up here higher. Okay, and it looks like they're actually about the same length for the most part. The back's going to be just a little bit bigger. And it is angled up, I believe, just a little bit. You see how that comes at an angle. I might have my angle, actually that's not bad. I can live with that angle there. And it actually looks like the back of this chair is indeed shorter. You see how the seat is longer down here than the back is high. So I was correct to begin with, so I'm going to just bring this back down here. I guess since I have windows, while I'm basing this first thing, if you have windows, you might as well use it. So you can drag these into the corners here and keep these aligned so they both stay up for the meantime while you get this part started. Like I said, I know that you can put up this on planes, and if you are advanced to where you know how to do that, go ahead and do that, because you can trace over this exactly, but we have not covered materials yet, and I'm not going to cover materials just for this. So you could use a background image as well, but since we're working in different views, it's just simpler to jump back and forth for now. So you'll notice that there's some curves here, but I want to save the curves till the end, because we might do a smooth selection or a volume selection here maybe, and do a push and pull or something similar. I haven't really decided yet, so I'm not going to add the curves just yet. I'm going to leave this as straight corners for now. Alright, so that looks good. Just to show you, you know how I'm kind of messing with this back and forth here. Just to show you, I'm going to select segment again, and I'm going to hit delete here, delete here, delete here, and delete here. And I'm going to select spline and select this line that I have left here. And if you remember from the other video, I'm going to come down here and do outline. And this will allow me to create that so that's consistent on all the way around. So 3, There's 4. I think 3 probably looks best. So I'll just outline that so I know that they're consistent. It looks like I was close before, but that's fine. Okay, and it looks like I have my vertex moved here, so what I'm going to actually do is select everything. And I want to move this point, so I need to turn back on snap by hitting S, and I'm going to move, and I actually need to make sure that I turn on endpoint because I want to snap to that, or vertex should work as well, and I want to snap to that vertex and move that to, looks like I'm going to have to move it. The snap's really tricky here until you get used to it. I'm just going to move it up. So I moved it up so I snapped to this other vertex, and then, or grid point, and then moved it down to snap to there, so that I'm back where I started. Okay, so that's at 0, 0. Okay, so I'm going to make this big again, and then I'm going to add an extrude modifier to this guy. E comes before F, and again, this is going to be about 21 inches. And I'll make my previews here so I can see it. Okay, so that green has got to go. So I'm going to actually not apply material, I'm just going to change the object color by selecting next to the object name. And instead of green, it can be anything, I don't care. We'll make it light blue. Okay, so the object color can be adjusted here, and while we're at it, we'll go ahead and name this seat. Okay, so there's the beginning of our chair. So we know that this needs to be rounded, and we also know that this might have a hump. It actually appears that it doesn't really have a hump. Maybe it has a little bit of a hump, but it's not a huge hump. So let's go ahead and round this corner now that we've extruded this and see what we're dealing with. So I'm going to step back to from my extrude back to my line here. And I'm going to hit 1 for vertex. I'm going to select this vertex here, and you'll notice there's a Bezier coming out here, which means that line is actually curved. And you can see that I could do something like that, which might be fine. So I'm actually going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to give it a little tiny bit of a hump there. And I'm also going to make sure I select this vertex and come down here and add a fillet. I'm going to click and drag this to about there. So I move my Bezier line so that this kind of comes up and then smooths back down. Looking at my thing here, that looks good for this. This bottom piece could actually come in a little bit if we wanted it to. So I'll actually grab this little handle here and move this in just a tiny bit there. Okay, just to get a hump back in there. And then I'll jump back to my extrude, and you'll see now we have that curve represented in our extrude. We also have a little bump there. Okay, so it's taking shape. Let's go ahead and see if we need to do anything to the top here. Whoops. Go back here to the top. I can find the right window. It does look like there's a curve in the top as well, so we'll come up here. Again, we'll select the extrude. We'll have to step back to our line. We'll select the vertex that we want to add a fillet to. And I'm going to go ahead and move this out too to give it just a tiny bit of a bump, but not a lot. Okay, I don't want it to be huge, and I want to move this handle up here so that the bump doesn't start so low. And then with that bump, now I can add a fillet to this guy as well. So it looks like 2.97 is too high, so I'm going to type 2.5 here. And I'm going to move this around just a tiny bit to get that to look better. Okay, I'm not happy with that. Let's see, what's this? I'm going to make this small again. Okay, so we can see that this comes up more at a point here. So this point needs to actually move over. Okay. We've got it's a little rough there, so I'm going to come up here to my interpolation here and step that up, and you'll notice that that stuffiness will go away the more segments that I give it. See how if I get real low, it gets real pointy. The higher that I take that, obviously the smoother that's going to be, and I kind of want that to be nice and smooth, so just going to give that a little bit of a rise there, like that. Okay, and I'm actually going to move. You know what? That's fine. That'll work. Okay, so I'll hit back to my extrude there. Okay, so there's the front and the back. Now, since we extruded this to sides, we're going to actually have to add a chamfer to. And we actually might run into difficulty here. Because we've already done this, the chamfer might not want to accept this. So we might have made it, or I might have made a mistake here. So let's go ahead and try that out now. So if we need to back up, we still can back up. So I'm going to add an edit poly modifier on top of this. Because now I'm on an extrude modifier. Notice I can't modify the sub-object. So if I wanted to select, say, like this vertex here, I can't do that because I'm in an extrude modifier. I need to add an edit poly modifier on top of it. And I'm worried about my segments here. And if I make sure that my crossing here is set to whatever's inside of it selects, I can just select that entire side there, and you'll notice it selects all of those loops all the way around there, top and bottom. And I need to check to make sure the bottom doesn't need to be selected here, so I can hold down Alt and select that bottom line to deselect that. And I don't think the back needs to be selected here. Maybe it, no, it doesn't. No, we'll leave the back. Let's see. No, the back is kind of straight. It has that little bump on it, but so we'll just try and see what happens here. And I think we're going to run into some problems here, so we might have to backtrack. So in order to add a fillet on an edge like this, you actually have to add several chamfers. So there isn't actually a fillet tool, but there is a chamfer tool, and if you open that up, you'll see that I can change my chamfer amount there, and I can up my segments, which makes it more curvy. But you'll see, like I said, we're running into an issue here because of this curve, which was kind of what I was a little worried about. So I'm going to hit cancel there. Let's see if I can use this, if I can get away with maybe using a different selection center. Maybe we can. Doesn't look like that's going to help us. Okay, so what we're going to have to do is actually hit Control Z and back up and get rid of those curves that we just added. So I'm hitting Control Z on the keyboard to undo, and hopefully we haven't reached our undo limit. And it looks like we have. Alright, so this is probably a good time to go ahead and talk about undos and max and how you need to make them much larger. So if I go to Customize and Preferences here, right now I have an undo of 20. So I can only undo 20 times, so I'm going to actually change that down. The higher you make that, the more memory you're going to consume, so make sure your computer can handle it. But I'm going to go ahead and make that 40. And we're going to have to do a lot of extra work here now. It might just be easier for us to start from scratch, but since we're learning, I guess this will work. So I apologize, but I guess this kind of helps you learn. So we can't add the fillet on the edge, so we need to get rid of these curves that we've already added here. So we need to take a step back to our line. Alright. Select these segments by hitting 2 and then selecting this. You can delete that, delete that, delete that, and delete that. And we just need to select 1 for vertex here. I'm going to move this up to here. Okay, and I'm going to move this vertex, let's see, this vertex over to about here. You know what, let's just go ahead and do what we did before. Since we've got both of these deleted, it'd be quicker, be neater, just to delete these and then select spline and do another outline. And we said 3 inches there in the other direction. So undo that and do -3. Alright, so now we can jump back to our extrude here. We're right back where we started, and now we're going to actually add our chambers first. So we're going to add an edit poly to this thing. And I'm going to select the edges like I did before. Oops, make sure I select segment first, or edge, I'm sorry. Select those edges and deselect by holding Alt at the bottom and the back. Okay, now I'm going to add a chamfer to this. Actually, I'm going to add several chamfers. Okay, so you can see now that my chamfer amount is set to 1, and I only have one segment, so that's a 1-inch chamfer with one segment. If I want this to go in further, I can make my amount larger. You can see there, it chews into that even more. And then if I want it to be curved, I add more segments here, maybe up to, there's 15 there. I can move this back a little bit, and you can see that it's rounding that edge by using a series of chamfers there. So that's the way that you achieve chamfers after the fact. And I'm going to go ahead and step this up a little bit more to make it nice and smooth on those sides there. Okay, and I guess what we could have done too is select the other side as well, but that's okay. So we'll close that out and we'll go to the top view. I'm going to hold this time, instead of holding Alt, I'm going to hold Control and select a box on this side. Select the other side, and I'm going to hold Alt to deselect that, and hold Alt to deselect that. Now I'm going to go back down to my chamfer. Chamfer. Okay, there we go. So that'll apply that to both sides so that we have the exact same numbers on both sides. It's not a huge deal. You see we get a little, that black line that you see there, that's actually a lighting issue. If I hit OK this to keep it and go to my little plus sign here and configure viewports, and you'll see that I have under lighting and shadows, I have 2 lights. If I change that to 1 light, that will get rid of that dark line on that side. Okay, so that's just a lighting issue whenever you see that. It just depends on whether you want to work with 2 lights or 1 light. It's not really a huge deal. Alright, so that looks good. See, I don't think... Yeah, so we can't go back to our line now because we've added an edit poly, so we've modified the geometry further. So what we can do here, if we wanted to, is actually select this edge in the back here. Alright, I'm going to go to a view here where I can see what's going on. But I want to keep this view so I can see the changes. And if I move that down, you can see I'm moving the seat back down in there and moving it kind of out, so I can modify this individually, but I think it's okay with where it is now. Okay, so let's go ahead and add a chamfer to the front here. I'm going to go to the top. I'm actually going to drag. I'm going to try first dragging a block. That's not going to necessarily work, so I'm just going to select that guy first and let's see what that does. There goes. We need to make sure we select those sides to do the chamfer here in the corner as well. And on this one, I'm going to change my amount a little bit more, because we want that shape in the front to be a little larger than on the backs. Okay, the rest of the stuff here we'll modify ourselves. So that'll work. I'll accept that. We need to do the same thing up here at the top. So I need to select the first line here, and then I also, what I'm doing here is just dragging a box around this other one by making sure that I hold Control. And I'm trying not to select these edges here. So what I could do is come up here, and you'll notice that if I do a box, that will work on the side. So you kind of have to figure out what works best. And I'll come back down here. Chamfer to the top. And okay that. Okay, so there's our chair seat so far. Alright, so go ahead and let's get out of this screen here. Go ahead and catch up, do whatever you have to do to get to this point, and we'll come back and we'll start on the legs. Alright, so let's go ahead and tackle these legs here, and I think for this what I'm going to do is, since the legs are symmetrical here, what we're going to do is we're only going to draw half one side, and I'll go ahead and introduce the symmetry modifier, and you can see how you might want to use that in the future. Alright, so you can see here, in order to do this, it's going to be somewhat complex because we're starting off, and let's say that this is the XY plane. We're still in the XY plane, and then this curves up on the whatever this might be, the YZ plane or the XZ plane, and then it comes back onto the XY plane, and then it comes back over. So there's a little bit of dynamics, and there's a little dynamics involved in this that we're going to have to tackle. We'll take it one step at a time. It's really not as bad as it looks, really, when you think about it using the right snaps. So let's go ahead and start. What we'll do is we'll go ahead and start the ground plane here. Now, since I started my seat at 0, 0, we're not really going to be able to draw on the 2D snap unless we move this up. So to make our lives easier, let's go ahead and move this up where we think this might be. And I'm guessing for most chairs that's at about 15 to 16 or 17 inches maybe. So I'm just going to move this up by selecting the actual object here. And you'll notice I need to make sure my selection is in the right spot here. My selection's here, so all of these values are related at this value here, so that's not necessarily going to help us. So you'll notice this absolute mode transform thing here. I don't think I've actually talked about this yet. So what this is the Cartesian coordinate system by default. So this is actual coordinates. So where my crosshair intersects here, that's where these points are. And we know that these are 2-inch squares, so if you do the math, you get 2, 4, 5, and 2, 4, and 5. So right where those points are represents that. If you want to move this a relative distance, you hit this little guy here, or an absolute distance, I'm sorry. You hit that guy. Now I can move this a relative distance in any direction. In my coordinate system, you don't really want to follow this coordinate system. You actually want to follow this coordinate system over here. So the actual gizmo that you see here is false, telling you that this is in the Y direction. It's actually should be in the Z direction, I believe. Actually, yeah, it should be in the Z direction. We'll undo it if it's wrong, but let's go ahead and type in 15 here and hit enter. And it is wrong, so I lied to you there. So I'm just going to hit Control Z to undo that. And we're going to move it in the Y direction. So I'm a little rusty with that, but just be aware that this says Z, this says Y, so it looks like we want to focus on the actual gizmo direction. So I want to move this in the Y direction 15 inches. Okay, so that'll move that up that'll move it up in the direction of 15 inches from any point. So now this point is considered 15 inches up from the bottom. So I'm happy with that. So I can turn this back now to the Cartesian mode. So now I'm at points. So we see that my Z point in relative coordinate systems up here is 20 inches, down 5 is about 15. So now the reason that we're doing this is so that we can draw our legs directly on with the 2D snap here. So let's take a look back here. Actually, right now is a good time to save if you haven't saved. Because of the undo issues that we'll run into here, if we go ahead and save this for the first time. If you haven't saved, I'm just going to save it with everything else here. And choose 11. Share. Okay, so looking again at this image here, I see that I said that I was only going to draw half of it, and I'm still going to only draw half of it. So looking at the top view, it looks like this, if I drew it, and this is kind of a perspective shot, but it looks like for the most part that the back of the chair starts with where the top of the chair is. So the back of the chair projects down. So the back of my chair is actually going to start about right here. and it's going to come over to about right here, and it's actually going to cross right about that point. My major grid line at 10 units there, so it's 20 inches. So so what that's going to do is they'll all come out here. So now that we have a good idea of exactly what it is we're trying to do, let's go ahead and go to the top view here. And I'm going to create a new line. And like I said, I'm going to start somewhere in the middle. It doesn't have to be perfect there. And I'm going to hold shift to draw a straight line. I'm going to come to about there. Now I'm drawing in the top view, but I'm watching this view down here. And I'm actually watching all my views. So that's the good thing about having 4 views, is once I draw this, I can draw this and see where I actually want to stop that. And I want to stop it roughly about there. Okay, and then after that I'm done, because all the other lines are rejected off of this plane, so I can right click to end that line. Okay, so now we should just have just that. There's 2 segments there on the ground plane. Okay, so that represents this half back here and then to here. Now we need to draw on another plane. We need to draw this, and the question is, this is not really even a question as far as to where. See if I don't actually have a nice front view of it here. The one that I'm trying to get isn't working right now. Let me check and see if my cable's unplugged. There we go. Okay, so yeah, it's just straight. It pretty much touches the right side of the chair there, so nothing tricky going on. I just wanted to double check. So what we'll do is we'll jump to this other side of view here, and we'll turn on our 2 snap, because we are snapping. Actually, we're probably actually going to want to turn on our 3D snap, because you'll notice that this line isn't actually on that plane. And if I drew a line, it's going to draw on the plane. So I'm going to actually turn on my 3D snap here to snap to that line. And I'm going to make sure that I turn off grid points, turn off vertex, and turn on edge segment. I can close that. That'll allow me to snap to that edge there. And then when I draw, you'll see that I'm drawing in 3D, but it's wanting to go back to the other plane there. So you have to be very cautious as to where you're actually drawing here. Okay, so I'm going to turn off snap now that I've snapped to the line that I want to snap to. So let's see if we can get by with going yeah, so let's go ahead and do that. What I'm going to do is turn on my 2 snap. It might be a little easier to do it this way. I'm going to turn on my 2.5 snap, which means it actually snaps to this object, but it projects onto the surface back here, onto this plane. So turn off edge segment. I don't know why I said edge segment. That was wrong of me. I meant endpoint. There we go. So we want to snap to the endpoint of that line. I'm going to draw, turn off snap after you draw your first line, and I'm actually going to draw a point like here. I'm going to come up and draw a point here, and I'm going to hold, actually I don't need to hold shift because this is supposed to come back at an angle to there, and then I'm going to right click because we're going to switch planes after that. Okay, but in the meantime we need to move this over, right, because when we drew that, we drew it on the plane over here. We didn't actually draw it on there's no plane to draw on here. We could have created a plane, but I thought it might be easier just to move it over after the fact. So we used the 2.5 snap to make sure that it was a line there. And then I'm just going to turn back on my 2 snap here. Actually, I'm sorry, we're going to have to turn on 3D snap because this isn't on a plane. If your object's not on a plane, you need to use 3D snap. And I'll snap to that endpoint, and I'll move this over to that endpoint and click. And that should have snapped to that, and it looks like it did. So we're good there. Okay, so if you remember, though, we still need to make some changes that we still need to attach these two lines because they're one line. So I'm going to hit S to turn off snap first of all. And I'm going to select either one of these segments. It doesn't matter which one. Just select either one of them. I'll select this one. Go to modify. Okay, and then there's an attach up here that you want to select. And once you select that, notice when I scroll over this other line, I get that funny symbol. So when I select that, that makes all of this one line, but there's still one more step, remember, that we have to do, and we have to weld this vertex right here. So now I have to select vertex, and you'll notice that I'm showing one dot there, but it's really not attached here. So I usually just find it easiest to select all of my dots and just hit weld. Okay, and that will weld that point together there. So now that is one object, so I feel confident that if I sweep on that, that's fine. It's all one object. And I'll come back and add the right curve here for this before I go on. So I'll select my vertex still, and I want to right click and turn this from a corner to a Bezier so that it's smooth. Okay, and I'll move this down. Look at my reference image here. See, that's not the one I wanted to look at. Like this one. Come on. Okay, for the meantime, I'm just going to make these smaller so I can see what's going on here. Okay, so it looks like it's just really, I need to pull these handles out to really broaden this. Right. Okay, there's actually looks like a little fillet there that we can add, but we want to at least get this in the right direction first. This looks like it doesn't need to be that far out there, maybe to here. And alright, I'm going to go ahead and add these fillets so I can tell what's going on here. That'll work. Okay, we have to remember too that this is actually our center line for our sweep. We still have a sweep to do. So you have to treat this as not an edge of this metal tube, but it's actually the center of the tube. Okay, let's add the fillet up here. Looks like this actually comes up maybe a little higher. I might have underestimated that, so I'm going to select this entire segment here by holding Control. So I select the first segment, the second segment. I'm actually going to select that segment. I'm going to move these all up together at once to about there. Right about there. Okay, so looks like this. Select vertex again. This comes actually out a little more. So this kind of comes up and out. Looks like it should still be coming out at this point. Select both of these vertices by dragging a box and move those over together. Alright, that'll work for now. I know that's a little bumpy. I'll come back to it after I get this other line. So, make this big and then... Alright, so just looking at the actual line segment here, we can see that we start off here and we come on and switch different planes. Then remember we had to weld this, and then we come up here and back, and now we need to go over on the top plane one more time here. Okay, so again, the easiest way to do this is just going to be to do the same thing we did before. We'll do a 2.5 snap. We'll make sure it ends on. We'll come to new line, snap to that endpoint. Maybe line tool there. See if we can have any better luck here from the top. There we go. Okay, it's down there. So same deal. We'll change this to 3, and we'll get our move here. Make sure we're snapping to the right line, and we'll move this up to snap to that other line there. Make sure your 3 snaps on. Make sure that it actually snaps where you want it to. Okay, so then when you get that, you can turn off snap. Alright, so we just need to add this to the other line. Again, it doesn't matter which one you select. Select one of them and modify. And then come to attach. And we'll attach it to this other line here. And then again, we need to select all the vertices. Turn off attach. Select all the vertices. Type weld. Okay, that'll weld those all together. And now we can move this first dot closer to the center. Looks like I've lost my gizmo somewhere. So if you ever lose your gizmo, you can come up to Customize, Preferences, Gizmo, and turn this back on. Move this over to about there so that these 2 points are lined up, because like I said, we're going to just use symmetry so we don't have to try making both sides the exact same. Alright. Looks good. So let's just double check and make sure that we have so it looks like it fillets there in the back. We don't really have a top view, do we? We have a back view though. Yeah, so it kind of just rounds around there a little bit, looks like. So we'll just add a fillet to that corner. So we'll select 1 for vertex. And we'll add a fillet to this guy, just a little one. There we go, perfect. Maybe too much, so I'll undo that. Maybe just do 1. Alright. Alright, so we have completed our line. We're ready to do a sweep. Go ahead and save this now, and we can select this line if we want to and make it a different color so we can see it better. Black. Okay, so now we can see that a little better. So what we're going to do now is just basically select this line. Oops, make sure we don't move it like that. I did accidentally move it there. And we're going to go to, let's see, for the sweep, I think it's a compound object. Or is it a modifier? It might be a modifier. Yeah, modifier stack and do a sweep. So the angle sweeps there by default. We just want to do a tube or a cylinder. So there's our cylinder. It's just super big, so we just need to make that smaller. Radius of maybe 0.5 inches probably. Good. Alright, so there's our tube. Alright, so let's add a symmetry modifier on top of the sweep modifier. Symmetry here. And we want our y-axis to be the symmetry. I'm sorry, maybe we want our y-axis should be right. X-axis is flip it. There we go. Okay, and you'll see that that welds those points together for us. So we might have to do a little modification. The reason that I keep adding these stacks on here like this is because if we want to, the cool thing about this now that I have all of this here, the most awesomest, amazing thing is I can select now, I can come back here to my line and select these vertices, and I can even turn on toggle end result so that I can see the end result. And if I find my endpoints here, I can actually move these endpoints, and you'll notice that it updates as I go here. Alright, so I can actually modify this as it's finished thanks to these modifier stacks. So I just need to clean these edges up here so that this looks more like what Mies intended it to look like. I don't want to hack his design, that's for sure. So I'm just going to straighten these up here. Okay, so this comes up and curves. This radius could actually be a little tighter, I think. Maybe this whole segment move out. Yeah, that's better. Alright. I'm not sure what this actual segment's doing here. So feel free to select that segment and come down here and hit delete. And that'll delete that. You don't actually want to hit delete on your keyboard. It looks like it is okay this time. Sometimes you'll get yourself in trouble there, so you have to be careful. It's best to hit delete or remove from over here. Alright. So this could use Bezier. It's pretty sharp there, I like that. Yeah, that's good. Okay, so we'll roll with that, and then we want to make sure that this point down here is where we want that. So notice when I do that, I don't just select that vertex because I know there's another vertex back there. I select a box to select both of those vertices. And what I mean is it's probably tough to see here. But what happens, focus here on these two dots. If I just come here and just select one dot, okay, it's only going to select that dot. So if I go to move this, it's only going to move that dot. So usually if I know there's a dot back there, if you drag a box around it, it'll select both of the dots. And then when you move it, you can move both of those in. Alright, and I just want to make sure that this is in line with the top there for them. So hit that about there. Okay, this all looks good. And I'm going to go ahead and drag both of these over to the right just a little bit. And this corner, this whole back segment, so I'm going to select two. I'll move this whole back segment out so that arc isn't hugging that so much. Alright. And I'll select vertices here just to move this back down a little bit. Good. And then I'll turn back on my symmetry. Look at that. This is black, throwing me off a little bit. It should be the other way around. So since we haven't learned textures yet, we're going to get the textures eventually. I'm just going to give this a gray color for now. And I'll give this the black color, which might be a little much for now, but okay, so far so good. There's that chair portion. I think this is probably supposed to be filleted as well, and it is. So again, since we use modifier stacks, it's the beautiful thing, and we can just step right back down again to this vertex here, and we can even, this time we'll go ahead and do filter results so we can see what's going on here. So I'll turn on end filter, and I'll come down here to fillet, And you'll see that I can see that change in my actual tube there. Get that a fillet. And this is actually too much of a gray. Alright. So I'm not sure exactly how that works out. It's hard to tell. Looks like it does stick off a little bit from the back there, so it doesn't actually hug it. It does come out just a tiny bit. That shadow kind of gives that away. Alright, so there's some other things that we can do to this chair here, and we'll look at those here. We'll look at just a couple things that we could do to make it even more, a little more what it should be. There's a few things that I think we could maybe do. So go ahead and save this and go ahead and catch up, and we'll come back here and finish off this chair and move on to something else. Okay, one last thing here I noticed on this chair that I want to change before we start looking at everything else is I made this maybe a little too long. I got a little carried away here. So I'm on the line stacks here. I actually need to select, I need to hit escape a few times to get out of here and select my extrude. And since I have this edit poly here, I remember I can't go back to edit my line now since I've added an edit poly modifier. So all I need to do here is actually select my faces. Select all of these faces here. And I'm just going to move those in to this direction. Okay, so basically just selecting those edges and moving that in to make this a little more shallow so it's not so deep. Alright, that looks acceptable, so that's better. And obviously now that I've done that, I need to edit this one more time here so I can go to back to my line here. And I can turn off the end filter there so I can see what I'm doing. Actually, I want to select vertex so I can get all of these at once. So I'll select all of these and just move this all over. So save me some work there. And that's a quick fix for that. So that looks a little more realistic, I think, as far as the depth of that chair was. Before was just a little too much. Okay, so I'm going to turn the black off of here so we can actually see. Alright, so one thing that we might want to think about for other cushions in the future is doing a soft selection or maybe a pool here. And there's a couple different ways that we might be able to do this. Let's go ahead and look at a volume select right now. So on top of this edit poly, I'm actually going to add a volume select, which is the fourth selection down here. And basically this makes a selection on the object. You can see by vertices. I'm probably going to have to create a grid here first because I don't really have anything to select here. So if I turn on edge faces here, you'll see all of my faces. This is just one big polygon. I need that to be broken up. So I'll delete my volume select, hit the little can here. I need to connect these segments. So basically to do that, what I need to do is see the easiest way to do this is maybe select. I need to select the most inner. If it might not let us get away with this, but let's go ahead and try selecting the most inner square here. Alright, so that's the most inner square on that side. Get the right one there. Alright, and let's try adding a connect here. This is actually going to give us a triangle. But let's just select two at a time here. Select the first one and this one over here. And do connect. And let's break this up into 10 segments. And then let's do the same here, but this time we'll have to select all of these. I'm holding control to multiple select here. And to this one, and then I'm going to do a connect again. And it already has 10 segments in there, so I can hit OK. So basically we just divided this big square up into 10 by 10 grids, and now there's 100 little squares here. So now when I add a volume select, and I change this to vertex, now I can just select these vertices here in the chair. I need to move the gizmo, not the actual object. Go to a view where I can see what I'm doing here a little better. Alright, and I'll rotate this so that it's with the chair here. Down in the chair a little bit. Good. And I've got vertex selected, so I'm selecting all the vertices that touches. And I'm going to come down here to, I don't think we want to, let's go ahead and turn on soft selection first. Okay, now what soft selection does is it selects the vertices and it tapers off like this. So this will have the strongest selection and it will fade off to the weakest selection. And we can adjust the pinch and bubble here as we'll see, and even the fall off. So you'll see if I make the fall off small, the colors will slowly come into this. Okay, so now my strongest selection is going to be here in the center and it slowly fades to this blue. So what will happen is if I go up here and add like maybe a push tool or a push modifier, I'll select push here, and if I change my push value, you'll see that it gets like a hump there in the middle and it slowly tapers off. It doesn't move everything with the same weight. So whenever you want to do kind of a cushion effect, you can add this push pull with a soft selection. Okay, and that'll kind of give you your gradient of a ramp there. Now, if we wanted to adjust how sharp that was, we would come back to our volume select, and we would adjust maybe our bubble. You can see that that's going to push the outsides up some there. Okay, that'll make it more rounded, and we can adjust our fall off to how far we want that to go. We can adjust, that's actually almost perfect. I'm really actually extremely happy we have one loose end over here. But that is pretty good for actually doing a volume select on this chair. So we should be considered lucky with that. That's almost like the perfect hump. So I'll just adjust that a little bit smaller to try and get rid of that one little fraggle over there. Okay. And I actually probably could move this over. It's not exactly centered. And when I move it over, I want to make sure that I select the gizmo and move the gizmo, not the actual object. There we go. Okay, so that'll give us a little hump there, and if we don't want the hump to be quite so big, we can make our pool a little bit smaller. So the soft selection is an excellent tool for doing something like this in combination with the pool. Because now we have like a little, like I said, a little cushion there, and it's not just a flat seat like it would be. So it gives us that really nice hump there. So if I wanted to come back in here after the fact and even add another, believe it or not, add another edit poly modifier to this. Alright, now that I have my push there, this is a bump. Let's say that I wanted to maybe add some buttons or something. I could select, I could go back to edit poly here again. I could select vertex. Alright, and I could select this time, let's say I wanted like a button here, here, and here, 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 and here on these vertices, right? And inside the edit poly now, it even has a soft selection. If you've been passing it all along, you've been passing it up. It's in here though. Soft selection, it's just minimized. So we can also do a soft selection inside of an edit poly. We can say use soft selection here, and we can adjust our fall off to really small, and we can have a sharp pinch for that. Notice it's like almost to a point, and it can kind of bubble in there. We don't want to affect back facing. We can do edge distance if we wanted to. Alright, so let's go ahead and move that down. Okay, just a tiny bit there. Okay, now you'll see that that kind of moves those in. So if we had some buttons that we wanted to put in here, we could do something with that. Now this chair doesn't call for buttons, and Mies might roll over his grave if he saw me putting these in here. But just for demonstration purposes, I think you kind of get the idea of where this could be headed. We can modify this here. Alright, and then click out there, and now we have our dimples there for our actual buttons, if we had buttons on that chair. Okay, so just a little more detail there. A quick way to add this stuff without actually going into a lot of modeling. Definitely could be, there's several different ways that we can do this. Let's try and turn on that other light that we turned off here. We can kind of see those little ripples there. They could be a little bigger, I think, a little deeper. Go ahead and do a quick render here with there's no settings turned on. Too dark. Make this back. Let's maybe make this. There we go, So we can kind of see the little dimples there. It's not necessarily the best effect. I think the first one that I had there with the pinch, I'll undo back here a couple times. Okay, and I'll take my bubble way down so that this is much sharper. My fall off way down. Move those in. I'm just moving my arrow straight down to move those vertices down. Okay, it could actually be a little sharper. You see, I think you kind of get the concept there. I'm not going to mess around with it too much more, but that would be how you smooth buttons. And then what you would actually do after that, you could come in with maybe a cylinder on just your basic object here, since you know these tools now, or at least you should. And you can come in here with a little cylinder, a little tiny thickness, and move that guy up here. And place it where that little dimple is, wherever that might be. I think it's like right here. Alright, and if you haven't guessed it yet, we will go ahead and add a edit poly modifier to this guy. Okay, if there's something that you want to work on and you don't want anything else to be in the way, if you're getting confused, you can always right click when you have that object selected, and you can isolate that so that that's the only thing you see, and then you can move this off. So now that's the only thing that I have to worry about. And when I want to get out of there, I can just exit isolation mode. So if I want to turn this into a button, probably the quickest way to try first would just be to select the edges here. Let's see. Yeah, let's try selecting. Actually, first of all, I'm going to step back to the cylinder here, and I'm going to change my height segments to just 1. And then I'm going to select my edge segments here. Select that edge and that edge, and then I'm going to come down here and select my chamfer. For some reason I have some crazy stuff going on here. Not sure. Let me step back to my cylinder here again and change my size to 32. Oh, I didn't select all the way around there. Let's try that again. Select there, hold control and select the bottom ones. Chamfer. No. That is interesting. Oh, my amount's too much. That's why. It's crossing over itself. This has to be like 0.125 maybe. Let's do 1.2. There we go. Smooth that up. And what I might do, just for the fun of it, is select all of these and select my scale tool, and I want to just scale in the Y direction just to squeeze it down a little bit there. Okay, and then I'll exit isolation mode and take my little button that I made here and move it down so that it's inside that. Rotate it. Actually not in the dimple. That's the dimple right there. Okay, so I think you kind of get the idea. This should just be centered basically on that vertex there. So then I could just hold shift and move this over and create 2 copies. That way it creates the next one for me. And I'll hold Control to select these, and I'll hold Shift to move these this way. I'm just going to make 1 copy this time because they're not where they're supposed to be. Move that up to there. And then 1 more time. Okay, I'm creating instances here because these are buttons. So if I wanted to make a change to 1, I'd want them all to change. There's nothing special about these buttons, so I would want to make instances here. Okay, so there's my buttons inside there. Those are kind of big buttons. I think you get the picture though for how that might work. Alright, so that pretty much completes this chair. I guess go ahead and experiment with it. And I'm going to decide here what would be the best. I think maybe we'll do a light fixture next. I'll have to look and see what I have here, but go ahead and experiment with this. And we'll come back, and we're only going to do 2 objects it looks like, so we'll finish up the second one. Alright, welcome back. The next thing we're going to focus on here is this light fixture that I found from Lightolier. It's got a lot of interesting features on it that we can pick up. I think probably we can get a couple of new features at least that I can see here. So I basically went to Lightolier's page for this, and it looks like the model number's here. So if you want to look this exact one up, you'll be more than welcome to. The reason I came here is because I have some overall dimensions that we can work off with here, just to kind of rough this in so we can get an idea of what it is we're actually constructing this time. Alright, so basically just looking at this and seeing how we're actually going to be able to do this, we can do a revolve for almost pretty much the majority of everything. Okay, the majority of this entire thing is just going to be a lathe, the lathe modifier. But I wanted to introduce maybe a polar array up here, and we'll revisit the boolean to create this heatsink that's up here at the top. We're not going to do any of the inner workings here because it's completely unnecessary for an interior and architecture rendering. You would never necessarily have all of this information inside of here. You would create your light fixture and you would place a light source inside of here that shined out. And if you wanted to have the batwing effect with scallops, you would have the light further up here, and you would have your light rays come out so that it actually hit the sides of this canister and created shadows. Or you could create your light source further down. What that's all about, but you can keep this light source further down here and achieve the same effect. So let's go ahead and get started on this. Like I said, it's pretty much going to be a lathe tool. It looks like we have a 9-inch diameter, so we're going to have a 4.5-inch radius over here. To here we have a little bit of a lip, and it comes up 7 3/4. So that should be enough to get us started. Alright, so and then again, for a picture of what this thing looks like, I saved a picture, so this is what the actual light fixture looks like here. So it looks like these might be 2 separate pieces. So let's go ahead and start this guy. So again, since it's since it's a circle, it doesn't really matter where we start it. It can be in the top left or front view. I still have my grid set to 2 inches. I just basically went up to File, New to create a new drawing. Okay, same as before. I want to start at 0, 0. So I'm going to turn it on grid points there. I have a 2 snap. I want to go create a line here. And I'm going to start at 0, 0. And after I have that, I'm going to turn off snap. And I'm going to hold shift to draw a line out here to about 4.5 inches. Alright, and I'm just going to hold shift to draw another line here. And this comes in just a tiny bit, and then this next line comes up here somewhere. Click and drop that next point in there, and then you can right click to finish that line. And we just need to modify this thing now. Same as before, vertex. I'm going to change this to Bezier so that we can get that curve going here. Okay. It isn't going to want to do this because it's on the end. It's going to be a pain. So basically what we can do here is we'll just turn this back to corner. And we'll come to segment. And we'll come to refine. And then we can drop another one in here anywhere. So you go to actually segment to add a vertex. So you go to segment, you select refine, and then you click where you want your new vertex, and then unclick refine. And then we can change this now to a Bezier. We can curve this now any way that we want. We know that this needs to be at 7 3/4. Right now it's at 14. So it needs to come down. Okay, it still needs to come down. This guy got carried away here when I drew this, so this needs to be much smaller. And dragging a box on all these. This little lip here is just a small little lip. Looking at this picture here, you can't even see it in that picture. If we look at the thing here, we see that there is a tiny little lip there. Okay, that's 7 3/4, so it needs to come up to about there. We can just actually, you know, to make our life easier, just go ahead and type 7.75 in there. I guess would be the smart thing to do. Okay, so same idea. I'm just gonna need to form this to make it look right, so take your time and make sure you get your shapes right. It doesn't have to be exactly perfect. We can always come back. Just want to get the basic shape down for now. Okay, it shows that these are separate here, but I actually think that, yeah, this screws in underneath here, so they are separate, but there is a little bit of a lip here. However you want to treat this, that's totally up to you. But I think it's a good idea that we go ahead and be thorough here since we're still working on. So since we're on this plane, we can just use a 2D snap here. We don't have to do anything special like we did before. For the chair, I'm going to turn off grid points and turn on endpoint. And I'm just going to click, whoops, I need to go back and create a new line here. Click and hold shift and draw a line back to there. Somewhere we're going to actually select the vertex here. I'm going to actually turn off snap by hitting S, and I'm going to make my X here 0 so it's exactly on the axis there. So I change my X to 0. I'll make this bigger here so you can see the X here. This needs to be 0. Okay. That vertex should be 0. And remember, we need to attach this now that we've drawn a separate line, because these are now 2 separate lines. So select that line, I can select that line, you need to just attach them. Alright, and then select the vertex to weld. So after you attach, you're never really done. You still need to select a box. I think my computer is trying to die on me here. Oh, I'm still unattached. Check that. And after I select all my vertices, select weld. 1 yellow dot. And now I can add actually before I do that, I want to outline this, right? Because when I look at this picture, this has a thickness. it's not solid. And actually, the way that I have this shown, I was wrong to do this line down here. I apologize for that. We can just make it smaller. This has a small thickness, so that looks like even like maybe a 1/16 of an inch. That seems thin to me. We're going to maybe do an 1/8 of an inch, but we need to move this over to like there. Actually, you know what? Let's just delete that vertex altogether. Okay, and then we'll select spline. And we'll do an outline here. Let's see what 0.063 looks like. It doesn't look bad. It needs to be negative so it goes in the other direction though. There you go. Okay, so that closes that all in completely. So now we have a closed shape. So now I can come up here and have my lathe modifier. And since I want my center point to be the axis here, I'm going to select my axis. And I'm going to change my axis to 0. Now that'll bring my center point here in the middle. Okay, when we come up here, we see that this center point needs to come in even more. Make sure, I need to make sure, it's getting kind of late, I'm kind of tired, I need to make sure I didn't come out here to 9 inches. No, I came out to 4.5, so that's right, so I just want to move these in so that it's not so sharp. Maybe best, since you have 2 of them here, to just go ahead and delete these. If I have a dimension for this up here. Looks like it's about 2 inches, so it's about right there. Just gonna get rid of these to make my life easier. Looks a little better. Alright, so let's go back to spline and try outlining this thing again here. Negative 0.063. And then we'll go back to lathe and check that out. Oh, I was drawing on the wrong plane. That's okay. I drew that in the top plane, so the best way to correct this, I guess, is if you want to, we can just rotate this thing. Remember now, we can turn on our snap here to rotate in snap increments, so I want that to be exactly 90 degrees. And 7.75. Alright, so we're hollow there in the middle like we should be. One thing you'll notice here is that it's really steppy. Okay, and that has to do with your segments here under your lathe. So usually, especially if it's going to be a light fixture, if it's going to be a light fixture, 32 might not be enough, because you have to remember that there's going to be light hitting these edges. And if you get light hitting an edge with an angle like that, it's going to show up in a shadow somewhere. So whenever you do a light fixture, you might want to take this up higher, maybe like 64 or something, so that you really get a nice smooth edge there. Unfortunately, you rack up the polygons here, but I mean, if you're going to have light hitting this rim, it's probably for the best, so you don't have jagged shadows everywhere. Okay, so make your light fixtures nice and smooth. Alright, so let's see what's going on up here. And actually, it looks like it's hollow at the top too. It doesn't necessarily go all the way over, so we're just going to step back one more time here and select all this and move all this over to maybe about there. Step back to lathe, and that'll give us the hole there in the top for our next piece. So for the top piece, we can probably just do a cylinder. It looks like it's just a cylinder. So the piece that connects here and here is just a hollow cylinder. So and we're not going to worry about the pieces on the inside, like I said. So for this, we could just draw a cylinder. So I'll go to my geometry here and select cylinder. I'll have 32 sides on that. And I'll just rough it in here. Move it up. Okay, I'm actually going to move it up to, I said this was 7 3/4, right? So 7.75. That'll make those flush. And I need my center point to be at 0, so all of these two need to be at 0 so that it's perfectly centered. Because I drew everything else to the center there. Okay, so this piece will give a different color here. For now, I'll give it gray. Okay, let's see. Do we have any idea of how big this guy is? 1 3/4. Alright, so there's our separator there. And then next we will draw a... Now there's several different ways that we can do this top piece. And I don't want you to think that the way that I'm about to do it's the only way, but I want to introduce to you the idea behind using the different tools. So there's definitely other ways you can do it. Don't think this is the only way, is basically what I'm saying. We need to find a height on it though. So it's doesn't give us a dimension, does it? We have a diameter to the outside of those fins to 4 5/8. We're going to say that the fin is actually going to be whatever size. So it looks like we just need to subtract this stuff here. So we'll subtract 15.0625 minus 7.75 minus 1.75 leaves us with 5.5625. 5.5625. Okay, so 5.5625. I just want to get this in here before I forget what it is. And the radius we'll figure out once we get this moved up here. Seems awful big, doesn't it? Yeah, that's way too big. 5.5625. 5.563. I messed up on my math here. We did 15 minus 7 3/4. 15 1/16 minus 7 3/4 minus 1 3/4 should give us this leftover spot. So maybe this drawing on here just isn't correct. Because if you subtract those two, that's what you get. I don't really see anything here that says that this is a broke line either, so that's just, I guess, misleading. But even in the picture, I don't remember it being... Yeah, I guess it is kind of big in that picture. Alright. And we said the diameter is 4 5/8. So that's 2.625 divided by 3.125. And the center has to be 0 and 0. .5. Okay, and now remember that was to the fin, so actually I want to subtract 1.25, so this needs to be minus 1.25. So this needs to be 4,313. Whoops. Wrong one. Looks right. It should actually be the same size as the bottom one here. All right, and then I'm just going to come up here. And it looks to me like these are just basically drawn right on the side of this thing. So what we'll do here is come and draw a line, and we're actually going to probably draw. Let's just get it close here. So I'm going to hold there. I'm just going to click here, and I'm basically just drawing a rectangle. Now I can hit snap here, but I don't have the correct snap settings set. Alright, so I'm going to undo that, and I'm just going to draw a rectangle instead. And I don't want snap to be on for this. Okay, so I'm going to turn snap off. I'm just going to draw a rectangle like that. And I'm going to move this rectangle so it's actually just inside that circle for now. And I'm going to modify this rectangle. And I'm going to, instead of add a poly, it's for edit poly for surfaces, but since this is a line, I'm just going to do edits. I'm going to do an edit spline here. Okay, it's the same thing as edit poly. It gives me my vertices here. You could actually use an edit poly if you wanted to. And I'm not going to make this exactly perfect. I'm going to make it actually a little bit smaller. It looks like these fins come out a little ways there. A little bit more. Okay, so same thing as before. I'm going to select these vertices here. Go ahead and make this big, make my life easier. Select these two guys, and come down here and give this a fillet. .367 is too much, so I'm going to actually do 0.125. Take that in manually. Okay, so there's my two fillets. Now I need to extrude this thing a thickness of maybe an eighth of an inch or so. So I'll give this 0.125. And I'll jump back here so I can see. Okay, so I need to move this. If I extrude at 0.125 and I want it to be center on that plane, I need to move this right since whoops, I just moved it a tiny bit there. But since this is resting, we can see this is resting on this plane, but I want it to split this plane, so I need to move it to the right, which is the X direction here. I need to move it half of that distance, so that's 0.0625. Okay, and that will move it to the right, and that will split that. Okay, so there's that fin, first fin. So what we're going to do now is just do an array. And it's important that we keep this as our center point when we're doing something symmetrical like this. Okay, usually what you'll do is you'll create this stuff in a separate file and then you'll merge it with your scene. So you won't actually model this inside your scene. You'll model it like in a file like this and save it and then import it into your scene. So don't be afraid to open a new drawing so that you can use this 0, 0, 0 to your advantage to be as precise as possible. Alright, so let's do an array here. It's actually not going to be out here by default for whatever reason. I've never figured that out actually. So if you work for Autodesk, please let me know. I'm going to right click here and go to extras. There's the array actually hidden under extras. And I'll drag that and dock it up here. So I want to do an array. Select this guy first. And then do an array. And this screen can be pretty intimidating, so I'll walk you through the polar array. What you have is you have a move, you have rotate, and you have scale. Since we want to do an array, a polar array, we're going to do a rotate. So we want to focus just on this guy here. Okay, if we wanted to do a linear array, we would do this, or if we wanted to do a scale array, we would do this line. But since we want to do what's called a polar array, we just want to do this. And we also want to make sure it's on an instance. So if we change one, it changes all of them. Alright, so let's see. It's not really an excellent tool. I guess what we could do, we would need to figure out how many of these we want first. 10 isn't going to be enough. Let's look at the picture and see if we can get an idea of. So it looks like in 180 degrees or so we have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, let's say 30. So let's change this to 30. And if we do 30 and if we do a 1D here, we do 30. We want to go in the use the pivot point center here. Pivot point center is here. We're going to have to move that eventually, but let's go ahead and enter here on the Z. Let's enter 360 divided by 30. That's 12. So let's enter 12 here and hit OK. And you'll see that it's going to rotate around my pivot, and my pivot happens to be on my object, and that's no good. So I'm going to hit Control Z there, and I need to actually move this pivot. And in order to move this pivot, we have to come over here to this little hierarchy guy. This is a pain, so you'll want to remember this though. And we're going to actually select Effect Pivot Only. Okay, under Adjust Pivot, Move, Rotate, Scale, Effect Pivot Only. And since we're working off of the center point, we have the luxury of just typing 0, 0, 0 in here. The Z doesn't really matter. I'll go ahead and leave the Z how it is. And then I uncheck this. And now notice that when I select this object, my pivot is all the way up here at 0, 0. So that's actually how we rotate or we move our pivot for our array here. Kind of tricky, I know, kind of a pain, I know. That is something that has to be done. So now if we come back to array, these should still be there. I can preview this, now it rotates around there. Looks good, I can hit OK. So there's our array around that object. Okay, pretty good. Pretty good. So what we need to do now is basically make this all one element, and we do that with a Boolean. Okay, so you'll basically select your object here, and I'm going to save it because I never trust Booleans entirely. So what I'm going to do is actually save this. For whatever reason, Booleans have a habit of crashing. So go ahead and save it before you do this Boolean. And I'm going to go to New, Geometry, Compound Objects, ProBoolean. And I'm going to start picking here. And no easy way to do this really. Just start picking these guys here. Whoops, I'm doing a race here. I want to actually do a union. So I need to make sure instead of subtraction I have this set on union because I want to make these one object. Okay, once you do this, it's kind of like finalizing it in a way. You can go back, but it's a pain. So I recommend that you do this once you know that you're finalized and ready to move on with this piece. Notice when we do this, the reason that I made this go inside this all the way is because when I select this, 3D Studio Max automatically trims that inside edge for me and makes this one. So notice how this is trimmed and this isn't. So when I select that, that inner edge goes away because now this is one piece. So it's important that those pieces actually went inside there a little bit so that when I union this, they actually become one piece. Alright. Now this guy should be one object. So if I move it, it moves as one object. So now that is just like we modeled. Basically, it would have been really hard to do this otherwise because of these fillets on the top. Okay, so this is probably the best way to approach this. Now, if I wanted to edit these individual things for whatever reason, you guessed it, I can leave Pro Boolean here and come over here and do an edit poly on top of this. And vertex, and now I can edit individual vertices if I want to on this guy, just like I could anything else. Okay, so after you add a Pro Boolean, you can come back and add an edit poly. And usually, to be honest with you, if you know that you're done with this, you'd probably just convert this whole object to a poly instead of doing it that way. But I like to use the modifier stack as much as I can. All right, so let's take a look at this guy here. Looks good. Alright, so, and I know we don't know materials yet, but I'll go ahead and throw a transparent material in here just to, okay, so there's our transparent material or whatever that would be on there. And we'll get to materials, I think, maybe in the next video or so. Let's see, anything else that we can add to this guy? Let's go ahead and throw a sweep on there real fast for a wire, and we'll call this. We'll call it a day on this one. It's pretty simple. Yeah, there are a lot of interesting things that you learned in this short video, especially the moving of the moving that actual gizmo or the center point for that object is probably the most useful thing that you'll ever learn. And just to go ahead and show you a new technique here while we're in this 3D view, what I can do is if I wanted to draw a plate to go on top of this thing, I can go to standard and I can select cylinder here, and you'll notice there's this little box here called auto grid, and what we've usually been doing is drawing on the grid and moving it. But if I wanted to draw directly on a surface that I already had, I could turn on auto grid, and you'll notice my little gizmo now changes to whatever surface that I'm actually on. So if I want to skip trying to move things and just draw directly on the surface, I can turn on auto grid. Notice without it I don't get that, but if I turn it on, I can draw directly on top of that surface. Okay, now I don't have to move it up to that surface. It's already on that surface. I just need to position it so that it's like 0, 0, if that's what I'm going for. Okay, and obviously I need to change the radius for the plate here and change the height to a thickness of maybe something like that. We'll make it black. And we'll do the same thing one more time here, do another cylinder. Auto grid still turned on so that I can draw directly on that grid. And maybe we'll move something like that. We'll move this to 0, 0. So it's nice and centered. And we'll give this a color of black as well. And we will draw a line from maybe a right side view here. So what I'll do is just select line here. I'm going to, right off the bat, instead of drawing corner here, I'm going to change this to Bezier. And I'm going to click right in the middle there approximately. click and hold type of deal here. Make sure you don't stop the draw command, because if you stop the draw command, it messes you up. Okay, as cool as that looks in this view, if I go to another view, it's just going to be flat. So what I need to do is, with my vertices, vertex selected here, and I'm in a left view, I want to go to actually a front view now. And you'll see that it's just flat here in the front view because we basically drew on that plane. So in this view, I'm going to actually take these and pull these out in different directions as well, so that it's moving dynamically on all the planes. It's not just flat on that side. So if I look at this in a 3D view, it's kind of spiraling up. So it's not just flat, it's kind of dynamic. And now I'm just going to add a sweep modifier like before. Not so fat. Maybe we'll do a wire radius here, make sure it's on cylinder. And wire is what, like 0.125 inches maybe. And it's coming out of its little thing there. No big deal. We can always step back right to vertex here. And what we'll do for that, looking down at this on top is kind of cool. It kind of spirals up there a little bit. But actually what we'll do is we'll come to segment here. And remember, we'll add refine and we'll add a point right here. And we'll make sure that this last point here is set to corner. Make sure you select vertex first. So that's set to corner, and we'll make sure that this is set to corner, and we'll move that so that it's straight. Well, not perfectly straight, but you get the idea, straight. And we'll make sure that this goes and terminates in the center of this thing. So that can be at 0. This is at 0. And this other guy is going to be at 0. Alright, and then we can jump back to sweep. Now it goes straight and then it starts to curve. And this will be black. This actually shouldn't be black. This should maybe be like a dark gray here that we've been using. Once we get into textures, we'll really get to have some fun with this. I'm just making it solid colors now since we don't really have textures. So there's our little wire hanging down, or whatever. If it was a pendant light, we might want to express that with a wire. And that's how you do wire. It's basically really simple. You draw a path with a line. You could also, instead of doing the sweep, you can turn that off. And for rendering purposes, you'll notice for these guys, there's a rendering thing here. And I said we weren't really going to do this, but if you want to use it, that's fine for wire. You can enable and render it, enable and viewport. And you'll notice you can give this wire a thickness by adding the rendering tab here. If you want it to render with a thickness, you need to make sure it's checked. If you want to be able to see it in a viewport, you want to make sure this is checked. But we can do the same thing here as we did before with a sweep, using that in place rendering thing. So we can just replace the sweep basically with that. Same thing. Alright. So that's the light fixture. Hope you got something from this video. This video probably contains a whole lot of information. And what I like to do from here on out is if anybody has anything specific that they're working on, I think it would benefit anybody. So please feel free to drop me an email if you know it. If not, leave a comment. Leave maybe some information if you want something specific, so I can help show something similar. I don't want to do your work for you like I always say, but I can definitely find something similar, or I can at least get you started. So just leave me a comment with a web link pointing to some images or some drawings or whatever, and we'll work on and come up with a solution, figuring out how to do these things. I can only model so many things until I run out of ideas. I mean, so please feel free to give me ideas. So I hope this helped. The next video, we'll get back into architecture and we'll start looking at creating some interior scenes. So I will see you next week.